Hey, economics students, I hope you're doing well. This is our second lesson for the week. And as a reminder, we're going to be doing two lessons every week from here on out to sort of match up with the new schedule that we've put out. And that's how we're probably going to keep things unless something changes, which hopefully things don't. Hopefully we get ourselves into a bit of a routine here. So our last lesson, we were going over how the government tries to take steps to keep markets from failing. And there's all sorts of different reasons the market can fail. And there's a lot of different things the government can do to try to correct market failures. And right now, this is a very pertinent thing because right now our government is taking drastic actions to protect our society, to protect us from catching the coronavirus, and hopefully protect people from needlessly suffering and even passing away. Now, in this lesson, this is a lesson where you can kind of see why sometimes economists get labeled as kind of cold or heartless, because in economic thinking, the way that we would be viewing this as economists is that the government is taking these actions to essentially save our economy. Because as human beings, we are sort of the most valuable resource on this planet. We are a part of the resources that need to allocate efficiently in order for us to optimize utility, to optimize society's wants and needs. And if we let a virus run roughshod over our society and wipe out a significant part of our population, that would have dire economic consequences. And what's happening right now is that there are some people who are saying that the government's doing too much. It is overcorrecting. It is over exaggerating the threat of the coronavirus, and it's under evaluating or underestimating the damage, the economic damage that's happening by forcing people to stay at home. Because if people are at home, they can't work, they can't produce goods and services, they can't consume goods and services, and resources essentially stop flowing the way that we are used to them flowing. And there is a vocal group of people who are saying we need to reopen the economy right now because even though we might be saving some lives, it's going to be costing us more in the long run, maybe even not only money and resources, but it might even cost us lives in the long run. And we need to fix this. Now, it was interesting reading some of your thoughts on this topic because most of you sort of agreed that things are kind of crummy right now, that shutting down the economy is not really, it doesn't seem like a great thing because it's not a great thing. But most of you also said, but we need to make sure that we're not reopening things too soon, which is essentially what most Americans, when you survey them, say. A lot of the protests that you see are representative of a smaller group of people. So that lesson is going to be bringing us into today's lesson, which is this idea that we are willing to sacrifice a certain number of human lives to reopen our economy. In other words, that there is a price that we are willing to pay for the loss of human life. And that is an economic question. Can you put a price on human life? And again, this lesson, it can be tricky because when we talk about loss and life, all of us have probably experienced loss at some point. And all of us have people that are that we care about deeply with our whole hearts. And the idea of putting a price on their life is just disgusting. I find it disgusting. That idea of putting a particular price on one person's life, it's just morally, it seems wrong. But economically speaking, when the government has to make decisions, they can't look at every individual person and figure out, well, how much is that person worth? How much is that person worth? They have to come up with some sort of, according to economists, they need to come up with, and they have to come up with some sort of value. How much should we spend as a society to protect a couple people's lives, or hundreds of thousands of people's lives, or millions of people's lives? What is that value? How much are we willing to spend? Because resources, again, are scarce. And so on this lesson, we're going to open it up with two. One thing we're going to open it up with is a video clip of a Republican senator who it's interesting to kind of hear his explanation. I like the way he kind of explains that he's sort of a down-to-earth, homey sort of presentation. So let's go ahead. All right, so this is going to be a clip of, this is a Fox show. It's an opinion show. This is a conservative sort of TV personality named Tucker Carlson. This, though, is an actual American senator. He is from the state of Louisiana, and it's Senator Kennedy. He's kind of known for being very anecdotal in the way he speaks. He usually has some pretty clever quotes. And it's interesting, he typically right now in politics, you have Republicans versus Democrats. And right now, Republicans tend to be the party that are saying we need to reopen things faster. We need to get people working again. We need to get resources flowing again. Democrats are mostly saying we need to make sure we need to make sure that if we do open the economy, that people are safe, and we might need to wait a little bit longer. The government in the short term can, increase unemployment checks. It can do other things to help the people who are at home, but we shouldn't put people's lives at risk. So those are kind of the two competing arguments right now. So this is a Republican senator, and I like the way he kind of talks about it. He brings up a little straw man argument here in a second, but let's listen to his take.
I value life. We all value life in America. So this isn't a question of not valuing life. This is a question of making a hard decision with the cold, hard facts. And anybody who thinks that we can just leave this economy shut down indefinitely until we have no more cases, well, they probably still believe in Bigfoot, because that's just not realistic. And every politician, myself included sometimes, is just dancing around the issue. The American people get it. We got to reopen, and when we do, the coronavirus is going to spread faster, and we got to be ready for it.
Yep. You know what kills more people every year than coronavirus? A lot more? Poverty. Poverty kills people in massive numbers. We should remember that. Senator, thank you for those wise words.
All right, so there you have it. And again, he's framing the argument that says, listen, we get it. If we open up the economy, the virus could probably spread, and that's going to hurt people. It's going to kill more people. But at the same token, we can't just keep the economy shut down forever, because that also hurts people. So it's like we have a terrible choice, and we have to make the choice that is going to best benefit society as a whole. I don't like the little straw man argument he made. Politicians do this all the time. But the straw man argument that he said, and this is when a straw man argument is when a politician or anybody is sort of arguing against something that nobody is arguing. And they're arguing against something that is so extreme that nobody's really arguing it, but it makes them sound reasonable because they're acting like people are. So like, for example, he said, we can't just keep the economy shut down until the coronavirus is all gone. Well, that's silly. We can't do that. Well, no one's arguing that. No one's saying we need to stay at home until there's no more coronavirus. Like, that's just silly. People, the argument is how soon should we open up? How much should we open up our economy? Who should we allow to go back to work to make sure that we are opening things up safely? And that's where the debate's going on. So it's not, it's not like Republicans are saying we just need to kill everyone for the sake of capitalism. Democrats aren't saying we need everyone to stay at home and have government mail everyone checks until every single case of coronavirus is gone. No, those are straw man arguments. But regardless, so this brings us to the idea of can you really put a price tag on human life, and how does the government do that? So the next thing I want to listen to, we're going to listen to a couple minutes. There's a really good NPR blog called Money Matters, and it goes into some different current events, and it's tackling this issue head on, and I love it. This is going to be an assignment for you at the end of this lesson today to read and listen to this blog. It's a pretty long blog, so you'll have a couple days to do it. But you actually hear the actual economists who the government has hired at different times to try to figure out this question: how much is a life worth? How much do we what price tag to put on human life? And so I'm going to go ahead. I want to start out by listening to the beginning part.
Planet Money from NPR.
So it's called Planet Money. I called it Money Matters. I'm sorry.
A lot of people, politicians mainly, have been arguing about something. Is it worth it to shut down the economy to save lives, or should we let people die to save the economy?
And baked into this argument is a question. Okay, then how much exactly is a life worth in dollars? It is a sticky question, and it happens to be very familiar to economists.
So The people who say, how could you put a value on life? I say, how could you not? How could you pretend people are valueless?
This is economist Betsy Stevenson. She's at the University of Michigan.
And what would it even mean to think about people as having infinite value? We'd spend all our resources on saving one person? People wouldn't make that decision.
Looking at how much it's worth to save a life used to be part of Betsy's job when she worked in the federal government in the Obama administration.
Federal agencies place a dollar value on life, and this value is used to determine which safety regulations are worth the cost, like whether we should require seatbelts to beep at you, and whether we should require dangerous chemicals to be labeled dangerous chemicals.
And now it seems that people, politicians mainly, are asking for the same kind of is it worth it analysis for the coronavirus. And Betsy, watching this unfold over the last few weeks, she was like, okay, you want to run the numbers, I can run the numbers. Is it worth it to shut the economy down?
All right, so we're going to stop. We're going to stop there. And again, for your assignment, I have a link to that. I have a link to that NPR blog that that I call Money Matters. And now I don't. Well, regardless, I have a link to that blog, and it's really interesting. It's you have 3 different economists throughout who kind of explain their role in trying to help the government through the last couple decades place a value on human life. And again, it sounds kind of odd, but it's very pertinent because that's essentially what we're doing right now when we're talking about reopening the economy. And I don't like the way that the radio hosts framed it. It's like, should we reopen the economy or should we save human lives? It's not an either or. If we don't reopen the economy, it has negative consequences that cost people lives. It costs people livelihood and their lives. Studies will show that, like Tucker Carlson said, if you increase the amount of poverty in society, the loss of life increases. If you reopen the economy, there's also a cost of life. So we as human beings, we are a part of the economy. We are the main resources that drive human economy. We are the humans, So it's not like, should we reopen the economy or should we save lives? It's which one, what is the best way to optimize life? Is reopening the economy in the long run going to help us more, or is it going to hurt us more? And that's what economists have to figure out. And if we don't know the true value of what a life is, we can't make the best decision. So what we are going to do, I do have a little bit of a presentation that I have this in your Google class if you want to look it over. There are some typos that I need to correct when I put it up, but about this idea, how can you possibly put a dollar amount on human life? And again, this is a tricky question to ask, especially right now, because we're all struggling with a lot. And I'm not saying what is the price of people that you care about, your loved one's life, just in general. When the government has to make, as Senator Kennedy said, look at the cold hard facts and figure out the best way to allocate resources, which includes the best way to protect human life. It needs to make them in the best way possible. The dignity, humanity, and efficacy of all people should be cherished and valued, period. But in economics, we can't say that life is priceless. We can't say that everyone's life has an infinite value. Because if life were truly priceless, that if we said life is so cherished we need to spend every last cent to protect it, to save it, we would never have speed limits over 10, 25 miles an hour. Because when you travel over a certain speed, the likelihood of you getting into an accident and hurting someone or somebody or that happening to you increases by a great amount. So if we really, really, truly thought that life was infinitely valuable, we would have like speed limits at like 10 miles an hour. We wouldn't let people just sort of walk around in the sun at the beach because, getting suntans, unless you have a lot of lotion on, that shows it really increases your likelihood of getting some very severe medical issues. I didn't finish the sentence, but we would mandate that all vehicles be made out of, the most safe materials and have 20,000 airbags in them and maybe some sort of fancy foam that shoots out if you get in a car accident. It would make vehicles cost $80, $90, $100,000. But it would make sure everybody was safe in them. Yet most people wouldn't be able to afford them. So you see there's always this trade-off. We wouldn't allow air travel. The list can go on and on and on. So as human beings, we ourselves in our own actions don't put an infinite value on human life. So economists say we cannot just pretend that life has an infinite value. So the question then, it's not does life have an economic value, but how much value should we put on a human life? Okay, you cold, heartless economists, then how do you do that? How do you determine the value of human life? And again, I've already belabored this point. Even though it is dispassionate, and there is a degree of this that is kind of an odd thing to have to conceptualize, if by being able to accurately value how much we as individuals and we as society value life, we can make sure that we optimize the quality of life through the maximization of resources in our society. So economists, they don't consider this being a heartless question. They see it more as, this, if we don't do this right, we're hurting more people. This is actually helping people by putting a value on life. So how do economists measure the value of life? We've struggled with that idea for decades. And what I want you to do, I want you to try to think about that. If somebody said, what is your value? How much do you think? Let's say, how much do you value your life? What is your life worth? Would you be able to come up with a dollar amount? What would you think? What do you think? Or if you can't conceptualize what you think life should be worth, how much do you think our government considers one life to be worth? What do you think these economists, when they crunch all their numbers and do all their fancy data, their data collection, what do you think their answer is going to be? I want you to keep that number in mind. What do you think the value of human life is? And again, it's important to remember, like I said, there are people that I love with my whole heart, and I would never put a price tag on any of their lives. So we're not talking about, an individual person. We just mean in general, on average. What do you think the cost of a human life is? And if you don't want to go there, I get that. But what do you think an economist is going to say? So this is a question economists have actually been trying to answer essentially from the late 70s, early 80s, and even a little bit before. The question would usually come around because a lot of times people would pass away due to a workplace accident where the workplace wasn't maintaining good safety standards, or maybe some sort of a traffic accident or something of that nature. And it had to be determined, well, what should that person have to pay? What should that company have to pay if somebody had a workplace accident because the company was at fault? And what economists and the court system would do is they would look at the cost of that person's death. So they would look at that person, they would see what his what his sort of average yearly earnings were, and if that person would have lived a full lifetime, like the average lifetime of 80, 85 years, how much money would they have earned over that course of time? And that's the amount that they would usually use, especially in the early 80s, for the value of life. Essentially the amount of earnings somebody would make through the course of their life. And you're probably thinking, well, that's dumb. All right, because we're worth more than that. As a person, we're sons and daughters and fathers, and some of us we donate to our society. We give to a lot of people. We are more than just a paycheck. So to say that our value is simply because is simply the amount of money that we earn, I'm more than just a worker. I'm more than that. I do more than just flip burgers at Burger King. All right, and a lot of economists in the 80s said agreed with that. They said this is a disgusting way to value human life. We as human beings are more than just labor. And so they came up with a different way, and this is still sort of the way they do it today. And I'm going to take a little bit of a sidetrack. This is not the way they do it right here, but it's going to maybe hopefully get you to understand what they do to figure out the value of human life. All of us as individuals, whether we realized or not, we put a dollar amount on our own individual life. So I want you to run this hypothetical scenario. So let's say at some point today, a magical fairy comes to you and says, "Hi, I'm the magical fairy, and I have a proposition. I would like to take 10% of your lifespan. I'm not going to tell you how long you're going to live, but I'm going to take 10% off of your life. So if you're going to live to be 100, you'll only live to be 90. If you're going to live to be 90, you'll live to be 81. Whatever. I'm going to take 10% off of your lifespan, but I'm going to give you cold hard cash right now for it. How much would you be willing to accept? If that fairy said, I will give you $100,000, would you take it? Would you say, sure, I'll give you 10% of my life. I don't care if I live to 90 instead of 100. That's worth $100,000 to me. Or would you say no? Personally, I would say no. I would not take $100,000. How about $500,000? If the fairy said, I'll give you $500,000, would you take that for 10% of your expected lifespan? How about $1 million for 10% of your life? Would you accept $1 million right now if you knew in the future that your lifespan would be decreased by 10%? And again, that could be like probably no more than 10 years. If you live to be 100 years old, 10% of that is 10 years. So instead, you'd only live to be 90. $5 million? What would you take? Because for $5 million, you could have, a pretty nice life. So let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say I'm going to take myself on this scenario. Let's say I settle for $1 million. And what I'm saying when I do that, I am saying that 10% of my life to me is worth $1 million. And if I'm saying 10% of my life is $1 million, to figure out what I value my entire 100%, it's very simple. 100% is 10 times 10%. So in order to figure out how much I value my life at 100%, I would just take $1 million and multiply it by 10. And that tells me what I value 100% of my life is, 100% of my life at, and that would be 1 million times 10 is $10 million. So when I say I'm willing to give $1 million for 10% of my life, I'm essentially saying I value my life at $10 million. That's how much I think my life is valued. I know it's weird. Oh, cool. So economists use fairies now. That's great. All right, so obviously there's no such thing as an economic fairy. But here is what there is. There is a lot of data out there about how much people are willing to be paid to work in high-risk jobs. So let's take this scenario. And this is not 100% real world, but it is more applicable. Let's say that tomorrow I get a call from Mr. Packard. He says, Mr. Court, you're fired. Listen, I've been watching your videos and I'm so jealous of your cardigans. I just can't stand to see it anymore. You cannot work here anymore. Because, cardigans, they're nice. So I go out, I'm looking for jobs. Nobody wants to hire a 40-year-old man to teach anymore. They want these young whippersnappers out of college who can poop out online videos like it's nothing. That's what they want. So the only place I can find a job offer is at the Chernobyl City School District in Ukraine. All right, and I don't know if you know much about Chernobyl, but there was a big nuclear accident there when it was part of the Soviet Union in the 80s. So in the Chernobyl City School District, they have 2 different high schools. Again, you see there are typos in this. I'll get those fixed. But they have 2 different high schools. And I have a choice. I can work either at Chernobyl High School Pripyat campus, or I can work at Chernobyl High School Reactor campus. They're essentially the similar high schools. Everything is similar. I teach the exact same subjects. The students' population is roughly similar. The only difference is that the reactor is closer to where the nuclear reactor is. And so there's more radiation. And my chance of mortality, it increases my chance of death by 10%. And the superintendent asked me, says, Mr. Court, you can pick either of these schools, and I don't really care. You can pick either one. But if you choose to work at the reactor campus, we would be willing to give you hazard pay because we understand that you're putting your life at risk. You are giving more of your scarce resources to work at Chernobyl High School Reactor campus. How much would you be willing to take in hazard pay to work at that dangerous spot? And maybe I would say nothing. I'll just work at Pripyat campus. Or maybe I'd say, well, would you pay me an extra $25,000 a year? Maybe I would do that for an extra $25,000 a year. I don't know. But regardless, even though this is a silly hypothetical scenario, all the time there are people in our country that work at higher risk jobs, jobs where the mortality rate is higher because either the job is actually very difficult, strenuous, and dangerous, or maybe it's in a certain a certain part of our country where there's higher levels of radiation, or the climate's different, so it's more dangerous. And economists can see how much people get paid for doing a particular job where it's relatively safe versus how much they get paid for relatively the exact same job, but it's different. They can see that difference in hazard pay. And by looking at that, they can tell how much we as society, we as individuals will accept, I should say, be paid for a little bit of an increase in mortality and they can use those numbers to get a pretty decent dollar amount for how much we actually value life. So I guess that makes sense. It would be complicated, but I can see how economists can figure that out. So how much do we really put a value? What do the economists say once they crunch all the numbers? And there is a solid answer out there. Our government does have a dollar amount. When our government tries to determine whether or not to force certain regulations, safety regulations on companies, they have to figure out, is the number of lives it's going to save at a particular dollar amount per life equal or greater than the cost of implementing this regulation? If so, then the regulation they think is good. If not, they say we shouldn't do the regulation. So this has been standard practice now for really the last 30, 40 years of our government. So it's no longer really a question of should the government put a price tag on human life. At least not right now, it's not a question. Right now the debate is, should our government put a different value on human life depending upon the age? So should older people have should the government value their life a little bit less since they've gotten to live most of their life? And should younger people have a higher value when the government puts in these equations since they have a lot of their life left to live? And the answer to this has extreme importance on how our government chooses to respond to coronavirus. There are some people who say because the coronavirus specifically impacts an older population, that we should take that into account when factoring the value of life. Other people say no, life is life, and putting a value on age is not right. And so that's kind of it. What I'm going to do, I have some open-ended questions, like how much does our government value life? Should there be a difference between the way government values a life of the elderly versus the life of the youth? And what I'd like for you to do today, tomorrow, over the weekend, listen to this really interesting blog. Now, again, it's not like a super high production value where there's all sorts of fun little, whatever, songs and stuff, and it's kind of on the longer side. So if you can at least get through the first half, you're pretty good, but I recommend staying through the end. And in this blog, these economists are going to come up, they're going to say yes or no. They're not going to be like me and equivocate all the time and say, well, there's two sides to this issue. They're going to say either yes, it's worth it to shut down the economy, or no, it's not worth it to shut it down. And it's really interesting. It's really neat. So I would like for you to go ahead, listen to that. And there is a Google form that I want you to fill out once you're done listening to this blog. The Google form does have a couple either questions that are right or wrong, so you have to listen to the blog. There is a transcript at this site, so you can read through it. Feel free to reread the blog as you're answering the Google form. There are, like I said, a couple questions that are right or wrong, so you need to make sure you're paying attention to the blog to get those questions right. And then, as usual, I have a couple of opinion questions at the end where I kind of want to see your thoughts on this idea of putting a price tag on human life. Do you think we should? Do you think we shouldn't? And I don't know, just a couple questions from there. Do you think that the current value the economists have come up with is actually a pretty good value of human life or not? And all right, that's it. So again, next week we are sort of done with market failures, done with the role of government in the economy, and we might revisit it a little bit later in the school year, but this sort of wraps it all up and hopefully drives home the real life scenario that we are in right now, and how economists are being called upon, not as much as medical professionals, but economists are also being called upon to help governments figure out what the heck to do. How are we supposed to allocate resources the most efficiently here? And different people are coming up with different answers for that. So, all right, I'll see you all on, I guess, early next week. We have some Google Meets, so I'll see you, I guess, in the Google Meets. And yeah, that's it. Bye, everyone.